In the turbulent 20th century, Vladimir Lenin's controversial quest transformed Russia from an imperial monarchy into a one-party socialist state, known as the Soviet Union. As the founder of the Bolshevik Party, he played a pivotal role in the October Revolution of 1917, which led to the overthrow of the provisional government, the assassination of the Tsar, and the rise of the world's first socialist state. Known for his influential political ideas and leadership, Lenin's reign as the head of the Soviet government was marked by controversy and gruesome policies. His actions and legacy continue to ignite debate and shape discussions about the nature of revolutionary movements and the development of authoritarian regimes. Welcome to Intriguing Icons. Join us on a thrilling journey through the diabolical things Vladimir Lenin did during his reign. Born into a middle-class family in the town of Simbirsk, now Ulyanovsk, in 1870, Lenin, originally named Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, was exposed to radical political ideas and literature from an early age. The execution of his older brother, Alexander Ulyanov, for plotting to assassinate Tsar Alexander III in 1887 had a profound impact on young Vladimir and solidified his commitment to revolutionary causes. During his university years, Lenin became heavily involved in Marxist literature and political activism. He joined various socialist circles and became acquainted with influential thinkers like Georgy Plekhanov and Nadezhda Krupskaya, who would later become his wife and lifelong partner in the revolutionary struggle. In the late 1890s, Lenin began to formulate his own brand of revolutionary ideology, merging Marxist theory with his observations of Russia's social and political conditions. He argued for the necessity of a disciplined vanguard party to lead the proletariat in seizing power from the ruling bourgeoisie. Lenin's seminal work, What Is to Be Done, 1902, laid out his vision for a tightly organized and ideologically consistent revolutionary party. His rise to prominence was further propelled by the events of the 1905 Russian Revolution. While the revolution did not result in the overthrow of the Tsarist regime, it demonstrated the potential of mass uprisings and inspired many to join the ranks of revolutionary organizations. Lenin, who was living in exile at the time, seized the opportunity to return to Russia and lead the revolutionary movement. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 further deepened Russia's social and economic crisis, leading to widespread discontent and political instability. In 1917, as the Russian Empire faced mounting pressures both domestically and from the war, Lenin and the Bolshevik Party saw the moment as ripe for revolutionary action. In April 1917, Lenin returned from exile in Switzerland to Petrograd, formerly St. Petersburg, and immediately set about reshaping the Bolshevik Party's strategy. He advocated for a radical shift in policy, promoting for all power to the Soviets, and calling for the overthrow of the provisional government, which had taken power after Tsar Nicholas II's abdication in February 1917. The pivotal moment came in October 1917, when the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, carried out the October Revolution, a carefully planned and executed coup d'etat. On October 25th of the Julian calendar, the Bolsheviks stormed the Winter Palace, where the provisional government was based, and assumed control of the government. The Bolsheviks' capture of key state institutes solidified their grip on power, and Lenin became the head of the new Soviet government. However, his rule was then marred by a series of heinous actions that inflicted immense suffering and resulted in significant loss of human lives. While Lenin's legacy remains a subject of debate, there is undeniable evidence of the destructive consequences of his rule, both in terms of policy decisions and the magnitude of human casualties. Lenin's rule was characterized by a combination of radical ideology, ruthless tactics, and a single-minded pursuit of power. After the Bolshevik Party's successful coup in the October Revolution of 1917, Lenin's government faced the formidable challenge of consolidating control over a vast, diverse nation in the midst of a civil war. In this context, Lenin implemented policies that prioritized the interests of the state and the Communist Party over individual rights and liberties. Before we move on and dive deep into the heinous acts executed by Lenin, we highly recommend you subscribe to our channel and never miss an intriguing icon story. Shortly after the October Revolution, the vision of the Soviet Union under Lenin's leadership would quickly darken with the onset of the Red Terror. The Red Terror was a period of intense and ruthless repression, initiated by Vladimir Lenin's Bolshevik government in the early years of the Soviet Union. It began shortly after the October Revolution in 1917 and lasted until approximately 1922. The main objective of the Red Terror was to eliminate perceived threats to the newly established communist regime and consolidate Bolshevik power over the country. As the Bolsheviks took control of the Russian government, they faced numerous challenges from both internal and external forces. Internally, there were political opponents who opposed the Bolsheviks' vision for a Marxist state. Externally, several countries intervened in the Russian Civil War to support anti-Bolshevik factions. These challenges contributed to an atmosphere of fear and insecurity within the Bolshevik leadership, leading to the implementation of the Red Terror. The Red Terror primarily targeted three groups: political opponents, counter-revolutionaries, and perceived class enemies. Anyone suspected of being associated with these groups faced severe consequences. The Cheka, the Bolshevik secret police, played a central role in carrying out the Red Terror. Under the leadership of Felix Dzerzhinsky, the Cheka conducted arrests, interrogations, and summary executions without any regard for due process. Arrests and executions during the Red Terror were often carried out based on flimsy evidence or mere suspicion, leading to many innocent people losing their lives. In addition to targeted executions, the Red Terror included mass repression and intimidation tactics to quash any form of dissent. The Bolsheviks aimed to create an atmosphere of terror that would deter potential opposition and solidify their grip on power. The Red Terror extended beyond major cities into rural areas as well. Peasant uprisings against the Bolshevik government were met with brutal force. The Tambov Rebellion in 1920 to 1921, for instance, saw a particularly harsh response from the Red Army, with entire villages being destroyed and civilians subjected to violence and famine. One of the most infamous episodes during the Red Terror was the execution of the Romanov family, including Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, and their children in July 1918. The Bolsheviks feared that the Tsar and his family could become a focal point for counter-revolutionary sentiment, and thus, they were executed to prevent any rallying around their cause. The Red Terror succeeded in eliminating many of the immediate threats to Bolshevik rule. However, it came at a tremendous cost to human life and caused significant social and political divisions in the country. The violence and repression also contributed to a climate of fear and mistrust within the Soviet society, which would continue to affect the nation for decades to come. While some defenders of Lenin argue that the Red Terror was a necessary response to external and internal threats, critics view it as a cynical and diabolical means of consolidating power at the expense of human rights and civil liberties. The legacy of the Red Terror remains a contentious issue, with some in Russia continuing to revere Lenin as a revolutionary hero, while others condemn his actions as a dark chapter in the country's history. Amidst the horrors of the Red Terror, there was a particular aspect that truly sends shivers down your spine. Lenin integrated an immensely menacing program called the Cheka, short for All-Russian Extraordinary Commission for Combating Counter-Revolution and Sabotage, was the first Soviet secret police organization established by Vladimir Lenin's government shortly after the October Revolution in 1917. Its primary purpose was to root out perceived threats to the Bolshevik regime, suppress dissent, and maintain the newly formed Soviet state stability and authority. However, the creation and activities of the Cheka had profound and far-reaching consequences for civil liberties, human rights, and the development of an authoritarian regime in the early years of the Soviet Union. The Cheka's powers were initially framed as a temporary measure to protect the revolution and deal with immediate threats during the turbulent times of the Russian Civil War. However, it quickly evolved into a powerful institution with sweeping authority and a vast network of informants and agents throughout the country. The Cheka operated outside the regular judicial system, allowing it to bypass due process and carry out actions without any legal constraints. The Red Terror, as discussed earlier, was a direct consequence of the Cheka's activities. Thousands of individuals, including former Tsarist officials, members of other political parties, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens all fell victim to the Cheka's brutal tactics. The Cheka's actions not only silenced political opposition, but also created an atmosphere of fear and paranoia effectively deterring many from openly expressing dissent or criticizing the government. The organization engaged in a wide range of activities during its existence from December 1917 until its reorganization into the State Political Directorate in 1922. Led by Felix Dzerzhinsky, the Cheka was tasked with maintaining internal security, combating counter-revolutionaries, and protecting the Bolshevik government. However, its actions extended far beyond these stated objectives, and its activities were marked by significant abuses of power and human rights violations. Here are 7 of the most horrendous things the Cheka did during its tenure. The Cheka's primary role was to eliminate perceived threats to the Bolshevik government. It carried out mass arrests and summary executions of political opponents, including members of rival socialist parties, intellectuals, former Tsarist officials, and anyone suspected of being disloyal to the communist regime. The Cheka's definition of counter-revolutionary was often broad and included individuals who expressed dissent or criticized the government. Number 2. Labor camps and forced labor. The Cheka established labor camps, often referred to as concentration camps, where political prisoners and perceived enemies of the state were sent. Those camps subjected inmates to harsh conditions, forced labor, and mistreatment, resulting in the loss of many lives. As if the previous 2 events weren't horrendous enough, you won't believe what they did more. The Cheka conducted secret trials and executions without any form of due process. People were arrested, interrogated, and often executed on the spot or sentenced to death without access to legal representation or fair hearings. Number 4. Mass surveillance. The Cheka employed an extensive network of informants and agents to monitor the population and gather information on potential threats. This pervasive surveillance system created an atmosphere of fear and suspicion, discouraging open dissent. The Cheka targeted religious institutions, particularly the Russian Orthodox Church, which it viewed as a potential source of opposition. Clergy members were arrested and religious properties were confiscated or destroyed. Even though you can imagine how evil the previous things were, the last 2 acts performed by the Cheka were absolutely diabolical. The Cheka used hostage-taking as a means of securing compliance and deterring anti-Soviet activities. Family members of suspected counter-revolutionaries were often taken as hostages to ensure the cooperation of the accused. The Cheka was notorious for its use of torture as an interrogation method to extract information and confessions. Many individuals were executed or subjected to brutal treatment without any formal legal proceedings. Overall, the Cheka's actions were characterized by widespread violence, repression, and disregard for human rights and due process. While some defenders argue that the Cheka's actions were justified in the context of the Russian Civil War and the threats faced by the Bolshevik government, critics view it as a symbol of state terror and the erosion of civil liberties in the early Soviet Union. The legacy of the Cheka continues to be a subject of historical debate and serves as a cautionary reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the use of secret police to suppress dissent and political opposition. However, not only the Cheka represented a diabolical policy. Likewise, Lenin's macroeconomics approach has led to terrible consequences for the population. His economic policies during the rule over the Soviet Union played a significant role in pushing the country into a downward spiral of hyperinflation, famine, and death. While Lenin aimed to create a socialist utopia by reorganizing the economy, his policies had disastrous consequences for the population, resulting in widespread suffering and loss of life. One of the most notable economic policies introduced by Lenin was war communism, implemented during the Russian Civil War from 1918 to 1922. War communism sought to centralize control over the means of production and distribution, with the state taking charge of major industries, banks, and agricultural land. While this policy was intended to support the war effort against counter-revolutionaries, foreign intervention, and internal uprisings, its implementation was hasty and lacked consideration for the complexities of economic management. The requisitioning of agricultural surpluses under war communism left peasants with little incentive to produce, resulting in a significant drop in agricultural output. This policy, combined with unfavorable weather conditions and disruptions caused by the ongoing civil war, led to severe food shortages across the country. As a result, millions of people faced famine and starvation. The 1921 famine, known as the Povolzhye famine, claimed the lives of an estimated 5 to 10 million people, making it one of the deadliest famines in history. Furthermore, the Bolsheviks' government decision to finance its war efforts by printing an excessive amount of money led to hyperinflation and the collapse of the Russian ruble. This hyperinflationary spiral eroded the value of the currency to a point where it became virtually worthless. Prices soared uncontrollably, while people's savings were rendered useless. The devastating impact of hyperinflation was felt by ordinary citizens who struggled to afford even the most basic necessities. In addition to economic hardships, the policies of war communism disrupted trade and production, causing a decline in industrial output. This had cascading effects on urban centres, where workers faced unemployment and deteriorating living conditions. The lack of incentives for production and innovation stifled economic growth and resulted in an overall decline in living standards for a significant portion of the population. The economic devastation caused by Lenin's policies paved the way for social unrest and resistance against the Bolshevik government. The peasantry, traditionally an essential support base for the socialist movement, grew disillusioned and resisted the forced requisitioning of their crops. The Kronstadt Rebellion in 1921, a naval mutiny and uprising, highlighted the dissatisfaction among sailors and workers who had initially supported the revolution but were now facing the dire consequences of its economic policies. The reality of Lenin's policies underscored the importance of considering the complex dynamics of economics and their direct impact on the lives of individuals. The tragic outcomes of these policies remain a somber reminder of the potential consequences of hasty and ideologically driven economic decisions. In conclusion, while Lenin's role as a revolutionary leader and his contributions to communist theory cannot be denied, his rule was tainted by a series of heinous actions that led to immense suffering and loss of life. The Red Terror, economic hardships, and the Russian Civil War stand as stark reminders of the destructive consequences of his policies. Lenin's vision for a socialist state came at the cost of individual freedoms, human rights, and the well-being of the population. The immense human toll of his rule serves as a sobering reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the potential for ideology to justify acts of extreme cruelty. Thanks for watching. Now that you've learned more, click here to watch another video about the next intriguing icon.